Hey everyone, this is Miss Moriarty, and I'm here to discuss with us topic 8.11. Now, the main focus of 8.11 is understanding wastewater treatment, or also known as sewage treatment. So, we've been talking a lot about how we potentially get rid of our waste that is generated. We've been talking a lot about the solid waste aspect, but how do we get rid of now the liquid waste aspect, which is something that you probably wouldn't always think about. Now, in looking at sewage treatment, you can see at a wastewater treatment plant, any of that kind of water that you flush down the toilet, water that you potentially use that goes down the drain in your sink, in your shower, and so on, winds up at a wastewater treatment facility. Now, here in the image, this is what's called the influent. So, this is what's going to be coming into the wastewater treatment plant. And the first stage of sewage treatment is called primary treatment. The main piece of primary treatment is to physically remove any large objects. So, a good way to remember it is primary treatment starts with a P, physical removal also starts with a P. Now, what do we mean by physical removal? That's usually using some sort of thing called a bar screen, maybe grates. And what these are going to do is water is going to be pumped through these screens, collecting any large pieces of materials that wouldn't normally wind up in the wastewater. Now, over time, what happens is that influent is going to be treated sometimes upwards of 3 separate times in different forms of treatment and wind up as effluent. So, big takeaway here, influent comes into the wastewater treatment plant. Effluent is going to be the liquid waste that winds up being discharged into any surface body of water after it's been treated at the wastewater treatment plant. When it comes in, it is items that are very, very large are going to be physically removed through things like screens. Now, what you'll also find in primary treatment is a grit chamber or sedimentation tank. So, besides large pieces of materials, we can also see soils or any grit, sediment wind up settling in this area as well. Now, after primary treatment is taken care of, it moves to what's called the secondary treatment. This is a biological process, meaning that bacteria are the main source that are going to be helping to filter this water. What is that bacteria going to do? It's going to help to break down any of the organic matter found in the wastewater and turn it into carbon dioxide and inorganic sludge. And that sludge winds up settling at the bottom of the tank. Now, to increase rates of decomposition, we know that bacteria are going to perform aerobic respiration as a result. And so we see that there is actually an aeration tank, which helps to increase the rate at which our bacteria can break down that organic matter. What winds up happening to the sludge that gets made, kind of similar to our grit chamber or sedimentation tank, it winds up settling to the bottom. They collect that sludge, remove any water from that sludge, and usually that sludge is taken to a landfill. It could also be burned or even used as fertilizer. Now, after primary and secondary treatment, a third form of treatment can take place in where disinfection happens. Now, that disinfection could be using UV rays, it could be using ozone, or even treated with chlorine. Once it is treated with either one of those disinfectants, that water can be discharged back into the surface water. Um, but we know that with this being wastewater, another step that can be included here, especially if we're putting it into surface waters, would be to remove any excess nutrients in order to prevent cases of eutrophication. So remember, as I was saying before, tertiary treatment is now going to be the use of some sort of chemical process in order to remove any pollutants that might be left as a result of our primary and secondary treatments. Most common ones are usually chlorine or maybe even UV light to kill any bacteria. Um, And this is, remember, a critical step in the process of wastewater treatment, especially if the effluent is going to be discharged into any surface waters. And we also want to try and remove any excess nutrients like nitrates and phosphates at this form of treatment as well. So here's a diagram just kind of briefly outlining what takes place. So here, if you look at step number 1, underground pipes are going to carry any waste to a treatment plant in your community. Any large debris are going to be filtered out by primary treatment using things like bar screens, grit chambers, sedimentation tanks. All of that is going to settle to the bottom in the form of sludge. As that water moves from primary to secondary treatment, in secondary treatment, an aeration tank is used to pump oxygen in order to help bacteria break down any organic material, turn that into CO2 and inorganic nutrients. Once again, anything that settles at the bottom is then brought to then the sludge making process. That sludge then has its water removed. That sludge is then usually taken to maybe a landfill to be disposed of. It could potentially be burned. It could also be used as fertilizer. And remember that next step is tertiary treatment. This is where the water is going to be treated with some sort of disinfectant, such as chlorine, UV light, or ozone. We can also see potentially the removal of nitrates and phosphates. And then the very last step is that treated water winds up back into the river or lake in your community. Now, what happens if you don't have a large municipal wastewater treatment plant in the community? Places that are very rural tend to have their own septic systems right on their land. So here is actually a drain field in someone's individual septic system. It acts just like a wastewater treatment plant in this case. The septic tank is where a lot of the water and sludge is going to wind up settling. Any of the wastewater that gets treated then gets placed in the drain field, and where it's then filtered out and released back into the soil. So here would be a picture of someone's individual septic tank. Here we still have the sludge that winds up at the bottom. The wastewater that gets treated goes out to the drain field. And usually if someone tends to have a septic tank, it does need to be treated every couple of years, especially if we start to see it overflow. All right, guys, that's it for our video on topic 8.11. Make sure as you watch the video, you took notes, and please mark this assignment as done.